everybody, and welcome to another Houdini tutorial. My name is Kate, and today we're going to learn how to cry like a professional in Houdini. When you do tear simulations, sometimes they're really easy, and sometimes you just have to figure it out as you go along. And that's the fun part about working in visual effects. It's all about how you tackle the situation. So, today we're going to learn how to do static tears across a character, and then we're going to learn how to do them on dynamic ones. So let's get started. Just to save time and energy, I'm actually going to shorten my timeline and I'm going to save my file. That is the first thing I'm going to do. I am going to create my object node. And for this particular lesson, we're not going to render our tiers yet. We're just going to build them. I'm going to show you in a variety of different ways to build tiers. So we're going to call this Cry version 1. So going inside here, we need to choose a model to cry specifically on, or we need a character to cry for us. So very carefully choose a digital asset to cry. In this case, I'm going to use the test geometry, Paul. So Paul is going to be our test dummy today, and we are first going to show you how to model static tears. So we're going to zoom in on Paul's face, and we're going to use something called Draw Curve. So the Draw Curve is a very useful tool in Houdini, and it allows you to draw curves across an object. It looks something like this. So we're going to plug it into Paul, and before we do anything with that node, the first thing I want to do is I want to add a null above it so I can render Paul separately and work with Paul in the scene while I'm modeling his tears. So I want to do out Paul. Now I'm going to go up here and create a new geometry node, and I'm going to call this render character. I'm going to turn off my tears for now and make sure I can promote Paul to the surface. There we go. Now let's start to model his tears. So I'm just going to hide all other. Actually, let's keep him on show all objects, and let's go to our curve tool. Let's go to projection, use UVs, and do geometry. So now we're going to project basically our drawing of our curves across the geometry. Right now we want to put some tears in his tear ducts. So I'm going to hit enter in my viewport, and you should see a big ball appear like this. This is your tool to draw. So basically what we want to do is make the radius a little bit smaller, because right now it's a little bit too hard to work with. So I'm also going to decrease my radius a little bit more, probably around 0.04, because the smaller it is, the more accurate it's going to be in this case. And his tear ducts are very small, so we want to make sure we don't draw on the eyeball itself, we want to draw on the tear duct. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to draw a very careful line. It doesn't have to be straight, as long as it's hugging the geometry. That's all that's important. And then we're going to move over to the next eye, zoom in, make sure we're at a good angle to see where we're drawing, and then we're going to draw another curve from the tear duct outwards, like this. Now we have to decide how we want Paul's tears to go down his face. So we can either do them from inside the tear duct, so something like this, going down the face, or we can choose the other side of the face of it going down his eyes here. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is add another null in my network. This null is just so I can deselect, and I can ghost, basically, the object and see the lines themselves. Now, if I hit my little point thing here, you'll notice that we probably need to resample our lines. They'll look a little bit messy, so that's what we're going to do. I'm just going to call this line for now, and then I'm going to put a resample. The resample is really important, not only because it's going to resample our lines for us, but it's also going to output some attributes that we need. So scrolling down here, where it says tangent attribute and curve U attribute, turn those on. And then over here, what we're going to do is just lower the length, something like 0.1. And now you can start to see those curves really come down the face properly. And they look starting to look actually very accurate to the shapes that we want. So now we want to also make sure these curves are still aligned with the geometry, because we also want to change this from straight edges to subdivision curves. And now you can see them actually very smooth. Now, the next thing we want to do is use a ray to project them back onto his face. So I'm going to put that one in there. I'm going to go to our Pol null, and then we're going to go over here. I'm going to hit Shift S on my viewport to straighten my lines, and I'm going to go to minimum distance. And that's going to make sure these lines hug the geometry correctly. Now the next kind of thing we need to do is model these lines. We need these to look like tears going down the face. And we also need to basically clean these attributes off our lines, or at least attributes that we don't need. So we have 4 different pieces of lines here. And we also notice that when we basically create our brush strokes, it generates all these different attributes. So there's some attributes that we actually don't need. The only 2 ones that we actually need are curve U and tangent U. I like having tangent U even if I still don't use it, just because sometimes it's useful. And we just want to check. We probably don't need this. We might need width and color, but let's just keep width, just in case. And we'll check everything else. That's good. So now we get to model this. But before we get to model it, we have to break these lines into sections that we can manipulate and animate. So what we need to do is lay down some blast nodes. And since we have 4 lines, we need 4 different blast nodes. The next thing we're going to do over here is we need to isolate these lines. Now if I just put something like 1 in here, it's going to blast away 1 primitive, which is up here, which is great. So we're just going to call this right tier duct. So I'm just going to go right, so R as in duct, and then for the blast over here I'm going to put 2, and so that is the delete non-selected. The left tier, because it's going down the face, and then this one's going to be 3, so this is going to be the left tier, the right tier. Then over here we're going to say this one's going to be 3, and this one over here is 0. There we go. So this is the left duct. Okay, now that we have everything separated, I'm just going to color code these because these are going to be like the most important aspects of our build for these kind of standard tiers. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to start modeling these. So when your eyes start to fill up with liquid, they kind of like get really jittery, and then it builds up and gets thicker over time. It kind of rises out of the duct itself. It doesn't actually start appearing in like the inner corner or outer corner of your eye. It just builds up over time. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to basically create some jitter in the line, and then we're going to animate the thickness going up, and then we'll copy and paste this over to our left duct. So I'm just going to ghost my objects here, and I'm going to add another resample. So this resample here is, once again, we're going to have to make some more jitteriness. And we're just going to add even more points. And then I'm going to add something called a point jitter. And on this point jitter, it's going to really, really jitter everything up, and it's going to mess everything up. So we're going to need to decrease the scale a little bit. So we're going to keep this at 1, and then we'll go times like this, and we'll find a good scale that, isn't too jittery, but it's jittery enough. It's going to create some variations in that line. Now, the other thing we need to do is go to seed, and we $time or T, and I'm just going to play back the timeline so you can see this move. So that's pretty good, but does it and will it hug the eye, right? We need to figure that out. So we might have to copy this ray over here, paste it down here, paste it on, and then once again put a null underneath, just so we can see how this jitter hugs the geometry. So it jumps up and down, but it still has that jittery aspect to it, which is great. We also might have to add in some more, points on there for the jitteriness, but it might be a little bit too much, so I might try and find a good ratio of jitter. Now let's also output our curve view attribute again. And now we can start to model this. I am actually going to output that curve view attribute. And then on these points, I'm also going to put an attribute randomize. And I'm going to essentially use something called p-scale to create some more values on those points that I can use to manipulate the thickness of the line. So I'm going to lower this a little bit because we want to be super small to hide in those ducts. And then we're going to use something called Polywire. So Polywire is going to be really thick and really ugly looking. So we're going to use something called curve view times at p-scale. And suddenly we get something weird like this, where it's kind of bulky. So we're going to have to add some subdivisions here. And we might actually even have to put these in brackets. And then we'll go times 0.5. That makes it a little bit smaller. Probably want this a little bit thicker. And I want to divide my curve view attribute by 2 because I think, or by some values, because I think it's a little bit too thick for me, to be perfectly honest. And I think we also might need more points. So we're going to go back up here to our resample, lower this a little bit. And this is going to look a little bit ugly, and that's fine. I'm going to just go over here to my p-scale once again and just play with some values to try and get it to a range that I can blend easily with my curve view. Now, this is going to be a little bit too ugly looking. This is good for now, I think. Just so we have an overall jitter, even though it's a little bit pointy looking. I think what we can now do is add something called a smooth. And then the smooth is going to basically smooth everything out for us like that. Now we want that kind of tier to build and bulge over time. So how can we do that? Let's use something called VBD from Polygons. So VBD from Polygons, if we go here and we lower the voxel size to something that is going to sample our polyline accurately, it's going to need to be really small. So you might take a lot of patience in this regard. So what we're going to do is just times it by 0.4 like this, till we get a value that we're happy with. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to use something called VDB Reshape SDF. And this VDB Reshape SDF is going to allow me to dilate my tiers like this for time. And then they'll get bigger. And this is going to overall control how much I want them to grow and how thick I want them to grow as well. So the next thing I want to do is drop down a convert node, and that's going to convert it to polygons for me. Now it's going to be a little bit heavy because we got 10,000 polygons. That's not ideal. So you might have to remesh everything. And remesh is going to eat away a lot of your polygons. So you're just going to have to find a good middle ground. Target size, iterations might not be a good idea. And then we can you might also have to times this by another value so you can just maintain the mesh to your liking. So now I want to just make sure I'm continuously aligning this with Paul's eye duct. So if I increase this VDB reshape to something bigger, we can now see that build in the eye duct and overflow. And then I can have the ability to animate this over time. So let's do that. I'm going to make this really small. So at frame 1, or frame kind of 7, I'm going to put this as 0. And then at frame 59, I'm going to put this at 10. Or maybe let's say 15. So it's going to get really big and poofy. We can zoom in. We got a really good mesh going. Then I'm going to put my color down, which we're going to put blue for. And then I'm just going to put a nice kind of little blue color down. And then I'm going to put an out. No, here, and I'm going to cache this out. I'm going to put this down as out left tier, and then I'm going to say file, and this one's going to be left tier. And we're going to let that save to disk in background. So while that's saving, I'm going to copy and paste this over to my other tier duct. So over here on the left duct, or the right, this is the right duct, my bad. So we'll put this over here, and once again, we will kind of, because we want both eyes to kind of swell up at the same time. Right tier, because I already relabeled everything, that is kind of my bad. We're going to call this out tier, and then this file cache is going to be R tier. And we'll save that out as well. So I will save to disk in backgrounds. So while both of those are caching out, I'm just going to network box them, place them somewhere where I know where they are. Now we get the fun bit of tiers going down the face. I'm going to go over to my left tier, which is going on Paul's other face. And now we're going to take a look at this line. It's been resampled, which is great. But now we have to figure out how to animate this tier going down the face. We're going to use something called Carve. So Carve is a really useful tool, and you can just use it if you just by kind of animating UVs like this. And it's a really useful tool because it kind of allows, you know, that freedom of movement down the face. So we're going to animate this to make it look like a realistic tier. So the first thing I'm going to do is everything has to start at 0 because tiers don't start automatically on your face. And then on frame 72, I'm just going to fully put this at 1. And I'm going to go to my first UV here and just place this down here. Now you might be wondering why I'm doing this. It's because, like, in reality, like, tiers kind of, like, they don't fully leave a straight line on your face, right? They have this kind of gradual kind of tier slidiness to them as they go down your face like this. I also want to isolate my tier, my last point on my line, because I want to use that point to create kind of like a teardrop shape as the tier is going down the face as well. So I'm going to put down a group node, or no, group expression. And we're going to switch this over to points. And we're going to say first point of primitive, which is going to be that, of course, but we want it to be the last point of the primitive. Let's actually try something a little bit different. Now that we have our resample, let's use something called Polywire again and say, okay, at curview times 0.1, because it's looking really big, 0.4, and we just continuously reshape this. So now we have somewhat of a shape building that is somewhat similar to a tier going down the human face. Just going to turn off my visualizer so you can see it better to just very, very sneakily do that. So now we have this like line that unfortunately, you know, doesn't really do a lot for us because it's getting very thin and then it gets very blocky towards the end. So that's not ideal either. So how can we fix that? Well, while we're thinking about it, let's go check in with our tiers going down human face, or filling up in Paul's tier duct. So basically we're going to plug this in here, and we're going to merge everything, and we're going to just play this back and watch these tiers build up in his eyes. So now we know that's working out just fine. It's just animating these tiers to go down the face correctly. So let's figure out how we can do this. So let's go back to our Carve tool. And I think let's try and resample this a little bit. So let's do a resample. Put it down here. So let's adjust this curve view, and let's see if this actually works while it goes down the face. That does work. Excellent. So now I'm just going to, after we have this, we do need to isolate the same point that has the highest kind of resample value, because that one point with the highest resample value is the point we want to attach our teardrop circle to, so we get that fully teardrop-like shape on the face. So I'm just going to go over here and I'm just going to ramp from attribute and try and visualize my curve view. And I'm going to use my infrared and also hide my objects. So we can fully see that only one point really has the uppermost value. I'm going to go to my geometry spreadsheet and I'm going to flip this upwards and curve view with a value of 1. We're going to create a group over here now, and we're going to say group expression. I want a point group and I want to call this tier, and I want to say at curve view equals 1. And this may or may not work, so we're going to have to maybe double equals it. And then there we go. We have our point that will always equal 1, no matter what. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to delete that node, and we're going to say we want to copy this to points. We want to say this is our point we want to copy to. We want our source group, well, our target points to be in tier. And we want a circle on that tier group. So we're going to use sphere, polygons. We're going to make this as small as we need it to be, which is still a little bit too big, in my opinion. We're going to just merge these two together so we can see how the size of everything aligns. And we're going to find a good size for this ball to be on our tier shape. Well, that looks a little bit too big. That looks like something else. And I think this might be good. But now we have to use a VDB from Polygons. We're just going to shrink this down again. We're going to try and get a really good teardrop shape going over these shapes, and we're going to use a VDB smooth as well. So now this is really starting to look like a tier if we show all objects. We might have to make our sphere a little bit more oblong, kind of a very decompressed tier, but I think this is more successful. So now what we can do now is we're going to convert this to polygons. And once again, we probably don't want high-res tiers that are over 1,000 polygons. So we're going to use a remesh again. And remesh is going to be a little bit finicky for us, so we're going to lower our target size a little bit more. And we're going to just lower the iterations. And that looks good enough to me. I think 200 is fine. I mean, it can be less than that, but I'm not going to be too chaotic about it. And then this is our left tier, so we're going to call this L tier. And we are going to save this, place a null underneath, symbolizing out left tier. And I'm just going to add my color again. So I'm going to go over here and steal my color from my other tiers. And I'm going to plug it into my node tree. Now the next thing I'm going to do is just copy these nodes again and paste them over here. And we're just going to do the same process. So basically we're going to go check on this guy and see how he looks before we cache it out. Now let's cache this guy out. This is our right tier. You can honestly call these caches whatever you want. It's really up to you. You are the artist in charge. And we're going to do right tier and copy, paste, and place it into here. Now I'm just going to cache everything out again. So save, and then I'm just going to network box my separate elements. You should always do this as an artist to show what different sections of the node tree you are working in, and what is done, what is not done, and it helps organize your file. It goes a really long way in a studio setting. And then when you're all done, now usually you also want to fix your timing of how you want to fill the tear ducts, because when the tear ducts get full, that's when you want the tears to start going down the face. In this case, we haven't really done that, so just be aware of that in the long run. Alright, so let's play this back. There we go. We have some tiers. So that is your first half of how to create tiers in Houdini, and stick around for part 2.